has done and is doing through Christ Jesus. Love it. Luke 24 is where we're going to be this morning. For the past several weeks, we have been on a journey. And that journey has taken us from Easter now to Pentecost. We're on our way. And during this journey, we've been looking at Jesus' instructions to his disciples following his resurrection. We have several points at the end of the gospel messages, at the end of the gospel stories, where you have these times, these moments where Jesus appears to his disciples. I have to admit to you, I haven't always spent a lot of time preaching about those different times. And so I'm thankful, very thankful for the opportunity to do so during this time that we've had together, this particular Easter Pentecost season. So, we've seen two sets of instructions already. We've been in John's Gospel twice, and we've seen two sets of instructions there. First of all, we saw that the leader, wherever you are, leader in your family, leader in your church, leader in society, the leader has the responsibility to choose daily to love Jesus. Jesus asked Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? I told you then that for a long time I've had the opinion that was Peter's restoration back into being one of the disciples. I'm not as convinced of that anymore. I think that might have happened at a different time when Jesus met privately with Peter, as Luke tells us happened at one point. But the leader has a responsibility to choose daily to love Jesus more than anything else in their life. And the leader then has a responsibility to trust God to feed those folks, to provide spiritual feeding for those folks that Jesus puts in our lives. We do that, we receive that food not in a selfish way, not in a self-centered way, but in a way where we recognize that all that we have and all that we are comes from God. And so we receive whatever it is that he provides for us. That's what we learned, the two things that we learned from John's Gospel. The first thing that we learned from John's Gospel. The second thing we learned was this: continue to walk with Jesus to the end, no matter what that end might look like, no matter what shape that might take. Remember, Peter and John are walking with Jesus along the shore. John is following a little bit behind where Peter and Jesus are walking. And Jesus is telling Peter how Peter is going to die, that there will come a time in his life where he will go where he doesn't want to go, and he'll be done, things will be done to him that he doesn't necessarily want done. Jesus is telling Peter, you're going to become a martyr. Peter turns around and he says, what about this guy? What about John? And Jesus' response at that point to Peter is, you don't worry about him. Don't worry about him. And from that story, we pulled out this idea that we are to continue with Jesus, not focusing on our circumstances, not wondering about ourselves, but instead keeping our eyes fixed upon him no matter what. No matter what may come, no matter what might happen. Keeping our eyes upon him no matter what, all the way to the end. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus instructs the disciples that walk with him that this is a daily choice that we make. As we choose to walk with Jesus, we are to make disciples for him, not to put our own wants and needs ahead of others. Last week in Mark's Gospel, we were reminded that Jesus will bring us through any circumstance that we can face in this life. No matter how scary, no matter how frightening that might be, he can bring us through anything. And as soon as we shift our focus, the focus of our faith, away from Jesus to the events that are going on around us, it gets us in trouble. Every single time. Shifting our relationship from Jesus to our circumstances will lead to fear, will lead to a lack of faith, will lead eventually even to our relationship with Jesus dissolving and being destroyed. That's what we learned from Mark. That's what we learned from each of the Gospels over the last 4 weeks. Today and next week we'll be in Luke's Gospel. This morning we'll be in the first part of Luke 24 in this appearance to his disciples section. Our passage for today is usually referred to as the road to Emmaus, or traveling along the road to Emmaus. And as we read, we'll probably figure out why it's called that. Chapter 24, starting in verse 13. Now behold, 2 of them Two of the disciples that are talked about in the previous few verses here, two of them were traveling that same day to a village called Emmaus. That's your clue. It's the road to Emmaus. Good? Yeah, look at that. Ryan, I think it just dawned on Ryan what's going on. Which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together of all of these things which had happened. So it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained, so that they did not know him. And he said to them, "What kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad?" Then the one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to Jesus, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? Have you not known the things which happen there in these days?" And Jesus said to them, "What things?" So they said to Jesus, "The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the third day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us when they did not find his body. They came saying that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." And Jesus said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things, and to enter into his glory?" And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone farther. But they constrained him, saying, "Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent." And Jesus went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, "Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us on the road, and while he opened the scriptures to us?" I know it's the middle of the passage. We're going to stop there. We're going to pick it up next week from that point and move on to the end. But we're going to stop right there because that's the point at which Jesus has revealed himself to these disciples. He has given them his instructions, or even invitation, we could call it at this point. This is a passage that usually, for most people, brings out more questions than conclusions. For example, the question comes to mind, who are these two disciples of Jesus? Have we met them already in one of the other gospel passages and they're just not revealed here? How was Jesus able to go unrecognized until he was ready to reveal himself? What specific verses did Jesus use to talk about himself and explain himself from the scriptures? Wouldn't you love to have been in that Bible study? That would have been fun. How was Jesus able to disappear from the sight of these two disciples while they're inside, sitting at the dinner table? And if Jesus had traveled on, where would he have gone that night? There may be other questions that come to your mind, and that's perfectly okay. These are just a few of the questions that bounced around in my brain this week as I read this passage. But mixed into these questions, I found some interesting words. And those words help us, lead us to make proper conclusions and proper application to our lives. So let's pull out those words this morning from this passage and examine those words a little more closely. The first word is found in verse 13. Two of them were traveling. So that word traveling, they were on a journey. They were on the road. They were heading from one point to another. Most scholars think that the disciples who are mentioned here are traveling from Jerusalem, where they've been with the other disciples, that they have been gathered together there on the third day, waiting in Jerusalem. That they've been with these folks, and now they're traveling the 7 miles or so back to Emmaus, back to their home. Now that's interesting. How often do we travel the same road, day in and day out? For the Chronos, how many times a week do y'all drive Highway 6? A lot. A bunch. Absolutely. For James, how many times a week do you drive I-35? More than you should. Yeah, absolutely. For all of us, we have roads. For me, it's Old Robinson Road. For most of us, Old Robinson Road or Highway 77. Without fail, every week, it seems like there's something that I'm supposed to get at Brookshire's. And I think, well, I'll leave the church, and on my way home, I'll swing by Brookshire's. It's on my way home. I should be able to do that. And what do? I pull out of the parking lot, I turn right, I go right down Old Robinson Road, and I keep going down Old Robinson Road until I get to the turnoff to go to my house. And I get home and I go, man, I'll have to go tomorrow and get that thing from Brookshire's. Because it's too far for me to get out now. It's a whole mile back to Brookshire's. What a waste of time. Until my wife gets home and says, did you get that thing? No, I'm going right now, dear. I'm on my way. But we get into those habits and we get into those routines so that y'all are laughing because it's happened to you, hasn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
At least 20 miles away.
Exactly. Well, for y'all have a good excuse. It's 20 miles away from where you live. For me, it's a bike ride. For Sam. Anyway, we get so used to driving or going or walking or traveling down those same paths in our lives that very often just the sheer monotony of doing the same thing day in and day out blinds us to what's going on around us. I'm not saying that this is the reason that the disciples did not recognize Jesus. It's obvious from the text that God was at work somehow in this, that their eyes were blinded to keep them from recognizing Him at this point. But what I'm saying is that very often, as we travel those same roads, as we go through that same monotony of getting up, of going to work, of taking care of family, of going into the office, of doing things that we have to do, of traveling, the monotony of life, that daily grind of just getting up and going about our living, that we forget what a precious gift God has given us in each moment of every day. We are told to rejoice, for this is the day the Lord has made. Yes, it's the day of salvation. The day of salvation is the day that God has made. That's more than just Easter. It's every day that we rejoice because of God's salvation. Because we can be a part of that. Because we can know that salvation. We can know the reality of having our sins forgiven and our sin cleansed. And we can know the joy of walking by faith with Him as He is making us holy as He is holy in that whole process. What a blessing. What an opportunity. Yet we go through life with our heads down, the drudgery and the monotony of every single day. We say, God, when will this all end? And we miss out on the opportunities that He puts in our path along the way as we travel. Into that distracted state that these disciples were in, Jesus steps. I'm certain that happens regularly in our lives. That as we're going down the highway of life, that we are distracted by the monotony and the daily grind of living, and we forget and we miss those times that Jesus steps in. Sometimes we see Him, and we're astounded by the fact that He's there. Sometimes we don't. How sad. How sad that we miss those opportunities. The next word that I want to pick out here occurs several times. It's translated different ways. It's translated as talk or conversed or having a conversation. We find it in verse 14 and in verse 15. These two aren't just traveling along in silence. They are conversing. They are discussing. They're sharing with one another about the events that are going on. There's active participation taking place here in each other's life. I think one of the marks of the Christian disciple that everyone seems to notice is the love that they have for one another. In fact, that was one of the things that was said about the early church. What love they have for each other. I mean, they're willing to lay down their lives for each other. They're willing to give to another person whatever that person needs. If they find out that there is a need, they find out that grass needs to be mowed, they show up and they mow somebody's grass. If they find out that someone has come upon tough times and they're short on supplies or short on food, they show up and they bring food. And just do that. Not because they have to. They do it out of love for one another. It's what we do. As these two are walking along, there is this conversation that's going on. There's this involvement in each other's lives. There's this sharing of events. There's the sharing of even feelings of what's going on. The fear, the concern, the dismay. Whatever it is that they're feeling, there is active participation as they're going along. They are talking, they're walking along, they are sharing ideas and thoughts. And in doing so, they're showing us that there is a deep, abiding, godly love for one another in their relationship. Not only are they talking as they're traveling along, but they are reasoning together, as verse 15 tells us. This is the third word here, reason. This word goes a little beyond the Greek word that is translated as talking or having a conversation with. This reasoning is having a discussion. I'm using that word in the way that most parents use whenever they talk to their kids. Their kids say, Are you and Mommy arguing? No, we're having a discussion. We're discussing things right now. Powerfully, emotionally. This is a discussion. They're reasoning together. There is a sharing of ideas and opinions. Not for a selfish reason, not for the means of trying for me to try to persuade you to see my point of view. But they're reasoning together to come to a common conclusion. They are bouncing ideas off one another. They're getting deep into this conversation. They are, even from the outside, it may look like an argument. As one says, but this happened. Well, yes, it happened that way, but what about this and this other thing and the way that this occurred and this thing? Do you remember when? All of this is going on in this conversation, and it's leading them into a deeper and deeper relationship with each other. They are trying to, as they're reasoning together, they are trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle